everyone, the Cartoon Gal 98 here once again, back with another Creepypasta reading episode. Today's Creepypasta is going to be called Marco or Zeno, I think that's what it's called. This Creepypasta is about a user who tries to do some Creepypasta stories and failed horribly. I generally like this story a lot. I think it is generally one of my favorite Creepypasta stories. Anyways, with that out of the way, here is Marco or Zeno. Have you ever heard of the fandom user named MarcoOrzo? He was a former Creepypasta writer who made 5 stories, 4 were lost episodes, and 1 was a game-related pasta. Achieved on Goshia's Lost Episode Wiki around 2019 to 2020, back when the website still uploads seemingly awful stories. And then the Spongebob Wiki in 2022. Most of his stories had the usual tropes you've seen in old shitty creepypastas. But his 2 last stories are much more messed up than you could think of. Marco was known to be one of the most hated and heavily criticized creepypasta users who went from being an unoriginal storyteller to a sadistic edgelord trying to scare the bejeebies out of readers only to be greeted with backlash that made him disappear from the internet entirely. I might list the stories he has made. Dead Fully, created April 29, 2019. From what I could remember, it was an obvious reskin of a popular Simpsons creepypasta by the name of Dead Bart. Except it features Fully from the Disney Junior series The Lion Guard. It was about a lost episode of the show where Fully accidentally falls off a cliff and ends up dying until it shows a photorealistic drawing of her mangled, bloody body. The episode ends with Kion, Beshi, Ano, and Bunga mourning over the loss of the poor cheetah until it cuts to the show's credits on a silent black background. Dead Fully is one of the most hated and ranted and highly low-rated stories on the Lost Episode Wiki, and some claim it was a blatant ripoff of Dead Bart, but with Lion Guard characters, while others claimed it's even worse than the original story. SpongeBob's Worst Birthday, created September 18, 2019. It was about a lost episode of SpongeBob SquarePants that was burned onto a DVD and found at Goodwill. It had all the typical tropes you could expect. SpongeBob wants his friends to join his birthday party, but they decline it and told him to fuck off. At that point, SpongeBob snaps and begins a killing spree in Bikini Bottom, murdering everyone in fucked up ways imaginable, with references to blood and gore and even hyperrealism added into the mix. The story ends with the viewer tearing the disc apart with their bare hands and tells the reader not to watch the episode if they come across it. Unlike the previous story, it was harshly criticized for its poor grammar and storytelling, thus shaming Marco for making this story. But he decided to shrug it off and made one last story on the wiki almost a year later. Mario's Murder, created May 21st, 2020. This was Marco's last story on the Lost Episode Wiki and first video game related creepypasta. And it's about an unsettling Super Mario World SNES hack. I'll give you a lengthy description of what the story is about. Unlike most gaming pastas, it started with the protagonist, Quincy Jones, receiving an unknown email of a Super Mario World ROM that is seemingly hacked. Quincy then downloaded the ROM and opened it on his SNES emulator, but he suddenly noticed that he got to play as Luigi instead of Mario. Meanwhile, Quincy played the game as normal with minor changes, like the sky or background being night and the music being dull, for an example, until he comes across a small red pipe in place of the giant gate at the end of Yoshi's Island 2. Once he makes Luigi enter the pipe, he drifts to an endless black void, only to come across the bloody, dead body of Mario. As Luigi stood there with Mario's corpse, an evil version of Mario appeared in front of them, with bloody, dark-colored clothing and black eyes with white pupils, along with the low-pitched version of the Kefka laugh from Sonic.exe. After the evil Mario appeared, Luigi was transported into a level that depicted hell, along with realistic sounds of fire and the screams from Blood Baron. Blood and gore were strewn around the place as Quincy, playing as Luigi, wandered the underworld level for a few minutes until the evil Mario appeared behind him and started chasing him, with the chase being similar to Sonic.exe. During this, the Super Mario 64 Endless Stair theme played in a Super Mario World sound font. Once the demonic Mario reaches Luigi, the screen snaps to black as it plays a distorted version of the deranged woman's scream sound effect. As the scream stopped, the screen flickered to static and it showed a hyper-realistic image of Mario with the same dark clothing and black eyes with white pupils, along with bloody text on top of him saying, "I am the real Mario." While the image was displayed, it played the slowed down and even more distorted version of the Kefka laugh, which caused Quincy to take off his headphones in terror until his computer displayed a bloody red version of the blue screen of death. Quincy's computer permanently dies after that, and the story ends with Quincy getting killed by a Mario plush, which looks like the evil Mario from the supposed Super Mario World ROM hack. Ever since the story was published to the Wiki, shitload of comments flooded. Some praised it as well made and inspiring, while others ranted that it was just as bad as his first two stories. They said it was a rancid ripoff of both I Hate You and Sonic.exe combined, but with grammar and cliches that are just as bad as the latter. But don't get me wrong, the story's pretty good and ironic. Marco decides to move. Harassment and mockery started to spread towards MarcoOrzo on the Lost Episode Wiki. As of late 2020, trolls decided to heavily vandalize Marco's 3 stories with insanely inappropriate changes and content, thus resulting in his ruined stories getting instantly deleted by site monitors, along with blocking Marco from the site permanently. He didn't even try to appeal that there had been an error, and due to the Wiki's bullshit moderation at the time, he left the site for good. After that, Marco stopped writing creepypastas for a year until early 2022, where he went over to the Spongebob Wiki, which is now flooded with irrelevant and trope-worthy Lost Episode creepypastas, such as THX trailers, crossovers, copycats, etc. He re-uploaded his first 3 unvandalized stories to the wiki, and he decided to make more until late 2022. His 2 new stories were explicitly different from the 3 stories he had made from 2019 to 2020, possibly taking payback on the people who ridiculed him in the creepypasta community. Arthur Gets Kidnapped, created March 15, 2022. This is Marco's first attempt at making an edgy Lost Episode creepypasta on Spongebob, centering around the animated PBS Kids series Arthur. I'll describe the story without going into unnecessary details. The pasta follows a guy buying a VHS with 4 random Arthur episodes at some shady thrift store and goes home to watch it on his TV VCR combo. The tape played 3 normal episodes of Arthur until it got to the 4th and last episode, which badly affected the protagonist. As the last episode played as normal, Arthur stumbles upon a sketchy-looking ice cream truck, playing an unsettling jingle. The man who resembles a bear walks over to Arthur, who asked for a strawberry-flavored ice cream with a waffle cone. In response, the man would put Arthur in his van and drive off, while Arthur's parents and siblings watch in horror, trying to think of a solution to get him back home safely. Meanwhile, Arthur was taken to the basement of the man's house, chained up on the wall. The man comes over to the poor aardvark and tortures him in ways I won't write down, as it is very graphic and suggestive, and it's something that it's etched into the readers' heads to this day. So yeah, the episode ends with Arthur dying a slow and painful death. Just like in any Lost episode pasta, the protagonist ejects the videotape and throws it into an active furnace, burning it into ashes. In conclusion of the pasta, the person told the reader not to find and watch the episode. As readers viewed the story, they were appalled. They began backlashing Marco, calling him out for child endangerment and any other fucked up allegation I could think of. Marco didn't give a shit at this point, and 8 months later, he decided to make his final story on spin pasta even more disturbing and tasteless than the last. Sonic DVD, created November 23rd, 2022. This was Marco's last ever story on the Spin Pasta Wiki before he was booted off of the internet entirely. It was a blatant copycat of the most shocking My Little Pony creepypasta called Goodwill DVD, but it features the anime series Sonic X. Marco said this story is way edgier than the previous story with Arthur, but that didn't help the fact due to its sick storytelling, way worse than Goodwill DVD itself. The pasta starts with a similar opening. A man named Chris Ortfield lives in a small town in Florida and buys a Sonic X DVD at a local Walmart. Yes, he bought the DVD from Walmart instead of Goodwill in this story. Once Chris possesses the Sonic DVD, he went home, put the disc into his laptop, and watched 5 random normal episodes of Sonic X, until it went to the unaired episode that heavily disturbs readers to this day. The episode plays similarly to the My Little Pony pasta, with Sonic the Hedgehog looking at himself in the mirror, only to be greeted with a series of disgusting and heavenly suggestive flashbacks I won't mention due to safety reasons. As the flashbacks ended, Sonic started to show signs of anger and began to take form, with his eyes turning into black voids and his pupils turning into a glowing red orb. I know Sonic.exe was used in this story, but it only gets worse from here, as I discuss this lengthy-ass story even further. Similarly to those shitty Lost episode stories, Sonic goes on a full murderous rampage. His first victim was Tails the Fox, but oh god, it was very appalling. Tails suffered the same sickening fate as Arthur from the previous story, but again, I won't type it down. After Sonic finally killed Tails, he went over to all the other characters in the anime, such as Amy Rose, Cream the Rabbit, Chow Cheese, Knuckles the Echidna, Rouge the Bat, Big the Cat, and surprisingly enough, Sally Acorn and the other characters from Sonic Sat AM, whom for some reason had a full-on cameo and were done in the Sonic X style. Unlike the blatant tropes used in this story, the deaths of the characters Sonic killed were references to real-life murders and tragedies, specifically devoid of any context whatsoever. As the twisted episode neared its end, the demonic Sonic was seen in a hyper-realistic burning city, with the sky being blood red, screaming, "I am God," in an echoing satanic voice, just like the Sonic.exe story. So the episode ends with a series of disturbing imagery and blood-curdling screams filling up Chris's room, which caused Chris to fall to the ground and get a heart attack, which nearly kills him. Chris then recovered from the hospital, with his parents reuniting him. The pasta concludes with a story about a messed up tragedy that involves abuse, bullying, murder, etc. And after that is a quote from the Bible. Like before, comments played the creepypasta with even more disgusted and horrified remarks, going as far as to spam vomit emojis and skull emojis to appear their reactions. One comment stated,
"Bro, what the fuck did I just read? This is just a shitty ripoff of My Little Pony Goodwill DVD, but with Sonic.exe added, and this time, far worse than two mentioned stories themselves."
Another stated,
"I can't stand it! This is My Little Pony Goodwill DVD and Sonic.exe combined, and adding references to real-world tragedies and murders doesn't make the pasta scary or edgy. It's just sickening, tasteless, and barely had any context to begin with. This is a lot worse than your previous story you have written about Arthur. Shame on you."
That was when all hell broke loose on Marco, and a month later, he would be his last time on the internet. Marco's downfall and conclusion. In December 2022, Marco was hatefully criticized and mocked online for his distasteful stories, with people calling all sorts of names about him. His 2 stories, along with his first 3 stories re-uploaded from the Lost Episode Wiki, were getting deleted from the Spongebob Wiki by site administrators, thus blocking Marco from the wiki entirely. Later on New Year's Eve, Marco's fandom account would be deleted due to a heavy violation of the site's terms of use. Things have changed in 2023. Goshio Lost Episode Wiki has been cleaned up and rebranded to just being called the Lost Episode Creepypasta Wiki, only to remove the name from the former site owner, who was a predator at the time since 2021. Spongebob, on the other hand, still makes crossovers, reskins, and cliche-worthy Lost Episode and video game pastas to this day. Each new one became more atrocious than the last. But what about Marco? Well, ever since the allegations back in late 2022, his whereabouts were unknown until the summer of 2023, when there was an MSN news article about a 19-year-old male college student from California named MarcoOrzo, whose mangled body was found in a forest not far from his home, believing that a wolf or a bear attacked him. As everyone in the creepypasta community saw this report, they were reminded of Zeno, the author who was hated by the creepypasta fanbase. As I'm writing this, I do have archives of his stories saved to my USB drive, but not the 2 stories containing sensitive and not safe for life content. I'll update this document if I have uploaded his first 3 pastas to my account. That's all for now.